Thank you. I'm already in trouble about the title, but I hope by the time I've finished you'll know why I'm saying that. It is definitely about life and having access to life and actually having a life rather than having a lifestyle. And to me that's baseline. If we want people to have improved health, usually the people we're talking about don't really have a lifestyle. A lifestyle to me is watching Lifestyle Channel and seeing how you can get sort of gold-plated balustrades on your new home in 5 easy lessons. The people I'm talking about are lucky if they do have a home. They're lucky if they have anyone who cares enough about them to talk about them, to hear what they want to say. So I'm afraid I'm not talking about lifestyle. I don't care who your stylist is, but the people I talk about don't have a stylist. They don't have designer eyeglasses, they have the $2 glasses from the junk shop. You know, I'm talking baseline human survival people here. I'm not talking about lifestyle. So that's my preamble to lifestyle. I'm talking about a right to life. A decent life. Just breathing in and out for most people. I'm talking about that struggle, not highfalutin stuff. I've listened to Rod with respect. I've listened to the questions with respect, and I just have one thing to say in response. There's a lot of talk about us happening. There wasn't one slide from the department that indicated the people being communicated with were consumers. We had everyone else. If you don't start from where the issues are, you won't succeed in changing anything but authoritarian stances about lifestyle. So nothing about us without us, please. I want to welcome and thank my colleagues, my peers, particularly Paula for that lovely introduction to the tone of the day, to all the speakers who are here, because this is a very important day for the health of consumers in this state and hopefully Australia. This is a day of great significance and of great fear. There are many providers out there very frightened by the sort of talk that's going to go on today. There are many consumers very frightened by the information that comes through on a day like today. But if we don't start talking about it, we will be a disgrace to the mental health sector, because we've known about this stuff for so many years and it's not being talked about publicly yet. I put a table, at PRA's expense, thanks to PRA, they don't even know they paid for it, but I had every academic paper I could find duplicated 200 times. And I put them on a table out there for you to take for you, your colleagues, anyone that needs to be educated. This is not just fanciful, emotive consumer garbage that's coming out. This is academically proven information that consumers are dying too early. Up to 30 years lost from life. In that case, I'm at the end of mine. In fact, I've exceeded the expectations. Why do we have to die 30 years early? It's not fair, it's wrong, and it has to stop. And I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm saying stop telling us about lifestyle, start getting us involved, start getting us moving towards responsibility for what this illness, or a series of illnesses, and these treatments have done to our bodies. In the 1990s, there was a women's health conference at Parramatta, and there's a couple of people here who were there. And at that conference, I raised these issues, and people walked out because I mentioned that word sex. I mentioned obesity. I was accused of embarrassing people. I'm not sorry, because the rest of the audience was there in tears, the consumers, because it was the first time somebody had stood publicly and stated the obvious, that our lives were going down the tube in a handbasket, mixing metaphors, and nobody was doing anything about it. And I stand here today, and at long last there are people doing things about it. Not nearly enough, and not involving us enough. The women at that women's conference heard about how women who have psychotic disorders often have irregular periods or none at all. They don't know when they're ovulating, or if they're not, they get themselves involved in sexually promiscuous games when they're manic, and develop all sorts of related sexual health issues, and nobody wants to know. They can't control their fertility because of the irregularity of their hormones. The endocrine problems for women will sometimes cause a very masculine look to the female face, development of hair in places that shouldn't have hair, prolactin excess in the breasts, sexual dysfunction, lack of libido, and I could go on to men, but that was what was raised in the women's conference. And we all have this most amazing figure, which I'll demonstrate. And that's without the weight on. That's with losing nearly 30 kilos. So you could just imagine how beautiful we all are and how sexually alluring, even as young people. You know, we really haven't gotten through what really happens to people with mental illness. This is just the physical effect of what's going on internally. And males, draw your own conclusion to what's happening in their bodies. And any male who's been on some of these beautiful medications will tell you how and, you know, that's not a great thing for somebody's self-esteem which is already impaired and who is desperately trying to maintain a relationship. So don't let me stand here and tell you it's about lifestyle. It can't be about lifestyle. So before I get too carried away, don't forget to steal all those academic papers and throw them at people, build paper houses out of them, do everything, because I don't want to take them home. Now, I need to move on to the presentation because they'll cut me off before I'm finished, before I start. So I've given you the first idea of what I want to say. So that's the personal stuff. Now, at that conference I talked about the Emperor's New Clothes. And if you know the children's story, The Emperor's New Clothes, the Emperor was a very proud person who wore new and wonderful clothing at every public event. Marvellous, beautiful clothing. Even if he looked ridiculous, people would say, oh, wonderful, marvellous, wonderful, marvellous. And this is what I think we do with the mental health system. Because it's the only system we've got, it's the only emperor we've got, we then affirm everything it does and every professional in it as being wonderful and marvellous and great and whatever. Now you might be, and that's great, and there are many good ones. But like the Emperor's New Clothes, we shouldn't be shot down if we suddenly say, but Emperor, you're wearing nothing. There is nothing of interest to us. So if the Emperor is strutting around naked, we should be able to say that. Or if it doesn't look so great, we should be able to say that. And we should be welcomed to say that. So I'm using the Emperor's New Clothes as an analogy again for us to be able to say what we really need to say when we're dealing with our own mental health issues and our bodily functions and our lifespan. We need to ensure that the subjects of the Emperor, those with the least power, are enabled to recognise their own issues. We don't need someone to preach at us, we need information in our level. We need to understand our own issues. We need to be assisted to act in our own best interest. We should be given knowledge about treatments and effects. And we should have real choices to facilitate life-extending action. Now, every one of those you could write an academic paper on. And I know that the health professionals in the room are probably saying, oh my God, she wouldn't take the medication if I told her what it was going to do to her heart and her arteries and her waistline. Well, maybe, just maybe, we should be looking at that before we prescribe polypharmacy. Did you hear what Paula said earlier about how many medications she was on and how fast her weight was gained? There are other heads in this room who nodded when Paula told us about that, because they too have polypharmacy and medications that, on top of one another, are not really treating the illness but destroying their bodies. So that's a really important series of interests there. Now, I'm probably trying to rush through a whole heap of stuff here that in reality would probably fill several libraries, but we don't have the time, so I'm rushing you through. I'm not doing it to scare you, I'm doing it so we move all this afternoon to have some really practical and consumer-friendly ways of dealing with all the issues that confront us. We have many, many known physiological and iatrogenic effects of mental illness and its treatment. If you don't know what iatrogenic is, it's the occurring things that happen despite the treatment or because of the treatment. Some hard facts, please. The realities of life for people living with persistent mental illness are: your life expectancy is between 50 to 59 years. In the general population, it's 81 to 84. That's not fair. Cardiovascular disease. We have 2.5 times the likelihood of these disorders than the general population. Respiratory disease, twice the incidence of the general population. Cancer. Luckily, cancer rates are pretty well much the same as for the general population. However, our death rate in males is 55% higher than other cancer patients, and for females 35% higher. Great. Diabetes. This is why everyone carries on about diabetes and weight. We have 5 times the rate as that in the general population. It's horrendous. These things kill you. So what is worse, the cure or the disease? Blood pressure, 34.1% higher than that of the general population. These are all averaged out, and there are different age groups you could extrapolate, but I'm doing this just to show you this is not just a fad. This is serious business. Liver disease in males, they have 3.5 times the rate of liver disease as the general population, and in females 2.5 times. And that's from research from Queensland Division of GPs, which did a literature review of current literature, 2008. This is not about lifestyle. That's about living. Just living. Obesity, 60 to 80%, and I could go on and on and on. We haven't mentioned the other endocrine issues. We haven't mentioned all the other physiological effects. I could go on forever, and you think of not just dentistry, but podiatry, optical and hearing services. All of those things get involved. Now we look at these known physiological and iatrogenic effects and we feel like we've been hit by a sledgehammer. We look at cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, metabolic disease, diabetes, blood pressure, liver disease, obesity, etc., and people talk about lifestyle factors. Do they talk about sexually transmitted diseases? Do they talk poor dietary habits? Are these ones all about lifestyle? If you only change your lifestyle, you wouldn't, these things you do to yourself. Well, we do, but there are probably valid reasons we do. Poor dietary habits. You live in a boarding house with a McDonald's voucher for breakfast. Tell me how your lifestyle's going to change. Explain to me how I've got choices. If I live in Pitt Street in one of the building backyards, how am I going to change a lifestyle? We're talking about people with persistent mental illnesses here, many of whom are not in control of a lot of these factors. Remember, we closed our institutions and we didn't put in place community-based supports. Do you remember that? Well, guess what? Guess what? We need community-based systems, we need community-based organisations, and we need empowering of the consumer to take responsibility for aspects of their life they can control. So we can add these sort of lifestyle factors, and it amazes me when people get accused of being non-compliant to medication. And if you know certain mixes of medication are doing all these things to your body, would you be non-compliant? I think a lot of people would be non-compliant. And I think we really need to address people's knowledge of whether the medication is assisting them or damaging them beyond what is reasonable to expect. Reason has to prevail. It's not medication for medication's sake that kills people, as you've seen. It should be medication for valid and real purposes. And of course are noted for our alcohol and substance use. In fact, many people find it as effective as a pharmaceutical product, and I'm not here to sell it. But I just think we've got to face the reality that if we had more effective medications, less damaging medications, then we might actually have less alcohol substance use, but only that's a dream, because there's not much money in this population, I can assure you. What does mental illness do to people? You already know this stuff, so I'm going to whiz through it very quickly. What value do we put on a life? Our own we probably value pretty well. What value then on a life that's lived with persistent mental illness? Because to me I'm seeing two classes of human being here. Chronically normal persons who tell us to take our medication and to conform with what the doctor says and make no noise, and the others that don't have these problems. I'm seeing, in particular in those cancer figures we looked at before, and the rate that people are dying who have mental illness in a persistent way, that there's two classes of valuable lives here. There's the very valuable lives and the not so very valuable lives. And I'm disgusted. The more research you do, the more disgust you feel. There are negative, I'm going to talk about 3 lots of negative things here. I'm going to be a negative woman today.
Janet, it's 6 minutes late.
Whizzing through negative things. People, the social perceptions of people living with mental illness, persistent mental illness, they're a drain on the welfare system. They can go out of here today and say, Janet Meagher said that people with mental health issues are a drain on the welfare system. This is a perception, and I've heard it many times, and I'm sure many in the audience have heard this. We use up valuable community resources. You know, there are more worthy people somewhere out there that we're taking the place of. We block up. Oh, I know people who block up the mental health system. They block up beds. They even manipulate the system. Now, how sick must they be to want to manipulate to get into a mental health system?
Especially ours.
Oh. Now, that alone should be a criteria for admission. Review the DSM. Now, they use up public and community housing. They use it up. Dreadful. They cause trouble for Centrelink. They've had to put security guards in there like they have in the mental health units. And they cause trouble for other agencies. They do. They do. They're other people. They're horrible, apparently. And they're often non-compliant with treatment. Just a class apart, really, aren't they? That's the negative social perceptions. And I could have gone on with that one. I think there's a book in that one. If I look at negative personal perceptions, this is about the persons, the individuals. People only see the effects of mental illness. They see the person as the effects. They see lowered assertiveness. They see lower self-esteem, lower economic status, lower level of social inclusion, lowered capacity for self-care and self-protection. These are the people that are dying too, you know. And these people have the effects of loss in their life as well as all the other things we've discussed. They have economic losses, loss of job, valued role, reputation, status. They have a personal loss, loss of credibility, loss of family, loss of relationships, and we've discussed that, and loss of genuine participation. And that makes me incredibly sad because it explains why they've become a 3rd class, 4th class, 7th class group of citizens who are most needy, of course. Now there are negative clinical aspects, and this is where I'm not going to be popular. I'm into popularity. There are iatrogenic effects of mental illness, the physiological things that happen to you because you have a persistent mental illness. Its treatments exacerbate or cause other physiological issues. We have a resurgence in ECT which causes long-term memory loss, and I don't care what the research says, I know for a fact it does. So how do you go out and get a job that's decent if you can't retain information or you haven't learned techniques to retain information. Cognitive impairment, function and disease of internal organs and systems. Your endocrine, metabolic and cardiovascular systems are shot. Your sexual performance, personal functioning and the effects of weight gain on musculoskeletal, feet, respiration, etc. are all impacted. How much screening goes on for known risk? We do risk management plans for blinking your eyelids these days. We know some of these risks. Age, gender, mental illness and treatment-related risks we're very aware of. Where's the management plan? Lifestyle. This is the one we blame. This is the one we blame for everything else, lifestyle. Smoking, substance use, obesity, demotivation, social exclusion, circumstances and conditions of living. We blame all of that for all of the above. I don't think it makes sense.
Jenna, you're up to 1 minute.
I'm getting there.
I know. I guess I'd love an opportunity, if it was possible, to ask you one question at the end. So you do need to wrap up. I'm sorry.
It's about my life, not your lifestyle. Now, you now have some of the facts. Answer this question. Is this issue about a consumer's right to life, well-being, health, etc., or insisting that their lifestyle must change? What's needed? Responses that are real and humane, based on the human being before you. Sensitive and truly helpful. Empathetic, understanding, respectful and empowering. All the things they've lacked, you're going to give back in order for them to take control. Time to change. Change thinking from blame. Change unjustified, judgmental and unworkable punitive attitudes. Forget about lifestyle. Talk about you can do it, we can help, and that's recovery. Hand it back to the consumer. You can do it, we can help. I hope today leads to new ways of understanding and addressing the effects of mental illness on consumers' lives. And I quote from Don McLean in his beautiful song, Vincent, "Now I think I know what you tried to say to me. How you suffered for your sanity and how you tried to set them free. They would not listen. They're not listening still. Perhaps they never will." Thank you.